let's see. Oh, no, that's not going to work. Okay, I think I'm
Ready
ready.
whenever you are. Ready whenever you are.
Oh, okay, I'm ready. Yep. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today for this introduction, essentially, to OER. So I'm going to talk just a little bit today, an overview of OER, what they are, how do they work, why should you even consider using OER now that we've got Booksmart. And so I hope that this is helpful for you today. I've got the link to the slide deck there. And also, I can throw that in the chat. Give me just 1 second. Oops, no, I can't because I'm presenting. I'll send the links after this, but you could copy that link there, or there's a QR code that you can use as well. Okay. Okay, so here is the official definition of open educational resources. These are learning, teaching, and research materials that have been released by the author using an open license, and it allows users to take this content and retain it, reuse it, revise it, remix it, or redistribute it, and that is called the 5 Rs. They can do this without seeking copyright permission. So that's how it differentiates it from regular textbooks. That's one of the big differentiators. OERs can include a wide range of materials, assessments, assignments, books, case studies, courses, primary sources, reference materials, tutorials, tests, and test books. So what really differentiates OER from open access, you might ask? So you're probably familiar with open access journals. You might have used this type of content, and you'll see, you'll be able to access this thing without going through a paywall. So open access journals, books, and videos are openly available without cost, but their intellectual property is asserted. In other words, you can't copy and share or remix these sources without permission. So they're covered under fair use, but they're not considered OER. What makes OER special is the author of the work has made a decision to release the work, giving permissions to other folks to use it. And so you may have heard of Creative Commons. This is a standard licensing framework for openly licensed work, and it has different levels of permission. So this list right here is listed in order of least restrictive to most restrictive. So the least restrictive Creative Commons license is to release it in such a way that the only thing you have to do if you borrow that work is to attribute the author. So attribution is consistent throughout all licenses that are Creative Commons. Attribution share alike means you can share the resource as long as you attribute the author, and you have to apply the exact same CC license to it. So if you were to borrow a resource that has this license, and if you were to put that in a PowerPoint and share it with your students, you would also apply the same license to it. Attribution no derivative means you have to give attribution, but you can't make changes to it. Attribution non-commercial means you have to give attribution, but it cannot ever be used for commercial purposes. So to make money. And so you can see there how those mix and match each other. And if you go to the Creative Commons websites, it tells you more about each one of these. And they also have a license chooser tool. So you as an author or a releaser of content can plug in what you want to do with your resource to that tool, and it'll tell you what kind of license you should apply to it. Any questions on that? Have you seen Creative Commons? Have you seen these little icons showed up on various pages? You might not have ever noticed it before, but now when you're out in the wild web and you see something like this, you'll know what that means. Okay, so how do open educational resource compared to traditional textbooks. For many years, there was a perception that open educational resources were just not good, not peer-reviewed, not have the same kind of thing that traditional textbooks have. That's not all really the case most of the time. At this point, most universities and libraries that are publishing open textbooks have some sort of peer review process in place. So as you can see on this chart, it kind of shows you the difference between traditional textbooks and open textbooks. And where they overlap is that they're written by expert authors, right? OERs are written by the same faculty who are writing for traditional textbooks as well. They are most often peer-reviewed. They are most often high educational quality. And they can also include problem sets and ancillaries, which is another perception that OER don't ever have these, and that's not necessarily the case. Where they differ is that open textbooks are available free and unrestricted online, posted in a place where everybody can access them without a paywall. Resources that are published as an open textbook can typically be printed by the bookstore or print on demand for $20 to $40. So it's a lower price. The electronic versions don't expire and can be continually updated. It can be customized and shared by faculty and students, and it has more creative pedagogical potential because of your ability to use that material and remix it. Traditional textbooks cost up to $400. The cost aspect of this doesn't always come into the equation for us now as faculty because of Booksmart, right? So that is, that incentive is not really there anymore for us because in our heads, the students don't have to pay. They'll get it for free. They'll have it on the first day. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but so that's something that won't necessarily change your mind about whether you want to use OER or not. Frequently, commercial textbooks will publish new editions, even though there are no meaningful changes. They might add a new introduction or change a few things, but the content is still the same. And they do this so that they can price it higher. They bundle books with add-ons. The online access obviously expires, and the rented commercial textbooks have to be returned. So this is kind of the model visualized of how open publishing works compared to publishing traditional textbooks. And this is helpful, I think, in kind of visualizing where the ownership of this material lies. With traditional textbooks, the material published is copyrighted by the publisher. So you've authored that book, you've edited that book, but you don't retain any rights whatsoever to that content. With open educational resources, typically, the rights to that material, you still have rights. You have copyright, and you have decided how you're going to release that material. Other people might change it, but that original thing is yours. And depending on the university that you work at, either you or the university retains the copyright for that material that's published on that platform. EKU Libraries, which publishes our textbooks, do not assert copyright over the books that we publish there. The author retains the copyright. So in the model on the left, obviously, there's a publisher who's asserted copyright over a book, who distributes the book through the bookstore. And then after it's been used by the student, it goes back to the bookstore because most often it's a rental. Or if it's electronic, the access disappears. And the students, or in this case, EKU, are paying the publisher and the bookstore for this content year after year after year after year. With an OER, they're not free. There's money involved. We are paying to host this content. We are paying, in some cases, when faculty are authoring books, we're paying student employees to help, edit the work or do other tasks related to publishing. But this is a one-time cost. So you're applying a one-time cost to this resource, and then it's available. The library has an ongoing cost associated with the platform for publishing the thing, but we feel like it's worth it for what we get in return. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is just some.
Haley, I have a
Go ahead. Yeah,
question.
yeah, Cassie, go ahead.
So in the slide before this, where does the bookstore come in with OER? Because I'm sure that they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart, as much as I'd like to think they are. But where do they come into play? Where do they get paid?
Well, with the bookstores, because many OER are published with the broadest possible license, that one that was like, all you have to do is attribute. So what that means is publishers can take that content and take it and republish it and charge for it. In many cases, the OER that you see in like Barnes and Noble's repository that has a little fee, like $20 or something, that's because they've added like some ancillaries, or they've done a little bit of work to sort of add to that OER. And that's where they're getting some money from that. The other possibility, of course, is that students may prefer a print version. We have not been able to set up the infrastructure for this yet, where the bookstore will offer print versions of our OERs for purchase at a low cost, which is something that we could do. We haven't just been able to make it work yet. For students who need accommodations, that is available. So for students who need accommodations, our bookstore will work with our printing office to print a copy of that book for that student. So yeah, there is not a lot of incentive for publishers to incorporate OER into their catalogs, other than that example of adding an ancillary and getting some income from that. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So this is just some background information on how the OER movement has kind of impacted costs. So, locally, for people who don't have Booksmart, it reduces the cost of textbooks for students, which we know is a burden to learning. So worldwide, in the past decade, OER have saved students about $1 billion. Institutionally, and this presentation I'm giving was actually adapted from a presentation that I gave to universities all across Kentucky, most of which are not using Booksmart. And so I mentioned the fact that, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, there is research evidence that students do better using OER. And so that could impact performance funding. The other thing, which I'm going to talk about in this next slide, is that widespread adoption and creation of OER has put pressure on commercial publishers to stabilize prices. So I'm going to show you a slide. I don't know how visible it's going to be from this slide, but my presentation has the image sources in the comments. So you can check this out later. But if you can see this, the chart on the right, college textbooks for many, many, many years were increasing way beyond the pace of inflation. Starting around 2014, 2015, where this green kind of bar is on this chart, you can see it kind of leveled out. So the costs are still high and more expensive than average costs, but it's leveled out. And one of the reasons is there's been pressure on publishing companies to figure out how are they going to still get revenue with OER. So that to me is a really interesting data that I'm still keeping track of. I'll just leave it there. So we have Booksmart here at EKU. The direct cost to students is eliminated. Why should we still work to adopt OER? Oh wait, actually, let me talk about this. Oh darn it, my image went away. I'm going to skip this slide. It's not that important. Oh, there it is. That's so weird. Sorry. This is a slide that I adapted by an Open Education Network slide, and they must have had some sort of timing in there. So let's just talk real quickly about inclusive access before we move on. Inclusive access is also known as equitable access, auto access, day one access. There's different words. If you look really technically at it, inclusive access is where either like a department or a particular course will adopt a model where the students pay the fee for that textbook upfront, and it comes like as part of their bill for the semester. That's inclusive access, and it's inclusive because everybody gets it on day one, and they can opt out if they want to, but about 2% of students opt out of inclusive access programs. Equitable access is what EKU has, which is an entire institution opts in to this model where textbook costs are paid up front by students. Typically, we're doing it out of our budget, which ultimately came from tuition dollars. So that's kind of how we're doing it. But so equitable access is the term that the industry is using for this, like across the university adoption. Most research demonstrating a greater benefit, and so this is just a caveat for these next slides. Most of the research that will demonstrate a greater benefit with OER versus traditional textbooks has looked at inclusive access models. So you've got that factor of you'll see that there's evidence that there's better student learning outcomes with OER, but it could be because the OER are available to all the students. And in those cases, students might have opted out of buying the textbook, so they're still not getting the textbook for the commercial version. So it's hard to say whether there's a difference in those outcomes because of that cost difference or not. There hasn't been a lot of research yet on the kind of thing we're doing here at EKU. Okay, so but with that caveat, there was a big study at the University of Georgia, which found that overall, the change in grade for courses that used OER was 8.6% higher across the board. And the DFW weight went down by 2.68%. So that's kind of how this chart is set up. There was a greater effect in most cases for underrepresented students. So you can see the effect was bigger for Pell eligible, non-white, and part-time students. So that's that study. I'm going to show a couple more slides related to that. So this is just kind of how it looks charted out. So the DFW rates in the non-OER classes was 10.9%. DFW in the OER classes was 8.2%. For GPA, in the sorry, I'm just looking at this real quick. Oh yeah, on the left is the Pell eligibility versus non-Pell eligible and white versus non-white. And so both cohorts of people saw higher GPA, but the performance gap with OER narrowed in both cases. Another study by Jones and Nyland in 2020 looked at the effect OER in a class has on student reading behaviors, and they found that students are more likely to engage with the text if it's an OER. And then there's a whole other list. And the research is pretty consistent across these studies. There's a small positive effect on grades with a slightly larger effect with underrepresented students. Okay. So in summary, there have been significant findings associated with higher rates of student persistence and success in classes with OER, with a larger effect among specifically non-traditional first generation, lower socioeconomic status, and BIPOC students. Okay, so that is one thing to consider when you're thinking about using OER. You might hopefully see improved student learning outcomes. Secondly is the other big factor I think people should consider is pedagogical freedom. So what you are allowed to do with OER, and this kind of reiterates what I showed in that previous slide, is you as a faculty member are able to take the content that is published with an open license, and you can copy it, share it, edit it, mix it, keep it, use it, do whatever you want with it, okay? As long as you follow the guidelines of whatever license it was released under. So you can upload it to Blackboard without fear of getting in trouble. Your students can take it and make suggestions and say, this is a weird example. Here's an example of this phenomenon in my context in Eastern Kentucky, right? And then you could incorporate that for the next semester. There are just different ways that you can engage with the content that is not static and tied to what publishers have provided with you. So a couple different terms I just want to define. There's OER enabled pedagogy and there's open pedagogy. So OER enabled pedagogy is what I just described, like the existence of OER in the world that have been published, like you can take that and just use it in your class. You don't have to make any changes, really, big changes to the way your class is done. You could, if you found content that was similar to the content currently in your textbook, you could just replace it and not make any changes. Open pedagogy is a more intentional process of designing your courses that allows students to engage with the content as creators of information rather than just consumers of it. So it's a form of experiential learning in which students demonstrate understanding through the act of creation. And you're inviting your students to be part of the teaching process. So for example, one example of this that you may have heard of is Wikipedia editing. So if you are doing a unit on something and your students are learning about all this stuff, instead of like just submitting an essay to you about this phenomenon, they can go in and see what the Wikipedia entry looks like for that and make changes and make it better. And so what they are doing is making things better for the world. And so it has meaning beyond just the classroom. Okay. So these are just some data I got actually yesterday. The association, what's it called? AAC&U, American Association of Colleges and Universities, released a publication with a bunch of data. It's called Making the Case for Open Educational Resources. And they, from this article by Seaman and Seaman that was just released, the most recent data shows how much the use of OER has increased in the past, basically since the pandemic. So the pandemic was probably a factor here in changing, faculty attitudes about, being able to make this content available to their students. So we now see that, I guess, 29%. Oh, this is awareness. So more people are aware of OER. This doesn't mean that they're actually using it. So faculty who are typically aware of OER usually teach at least one course online and have 16 to 25 years of teaching experience. So I don't know if you fit into this category, Camille, but here we are. You are now aware of OER. So with OER, faculty are free to choose your own materials, but you also have the freedom to modify the material in response to experiences that you have engaging with students in class. In this slide deck, I've put a couple of links to a couple of resources that I really encourage you to read and take a look at. The OER-enabled pedagogy library has some really good examples of assignments that you can try out just to get a taste of open OER-enabled pedagogy. And then Jesse Stommel, I don't know if you've heard of him or followed any of his writings, but Matt Winslow actually introduced me to him, and he's got great, just great philosophy, putting the practice and the philosophy together about why to think about this stuff. And he's a big proponent of ungrading. So his website has a lot of information about that. It's pretty cool. Okay. And then I wanted to just share real quick, if you aren't already aware of these, you might be aware of OpenStax. A lot of people know about OpenStax. The thing with OpenStax, have you heard of it before, OpenStax? It's Rice University. Rice University was one of the first publishers in this open space, and they started a highly curated publishing model, where they took submissions, and it was mainly scientific at first. I think there's some social science stuff in there now. I'm not sure about health. I'm not sure what all is in there. So it's a very focused collection, and it's great. There's great resources in there, but it's not as broad subject-wise as these other things. So the Open Textbook Library on the top left there is the University of Minnesota. They are the home of the Open Education Network, which is a nonprofit that seeks to advance open education, and they have a lot of great resources. And that particular platform is where I find a lot of really good, not traditional, but more like a traditional textbook-based thing. Like that's pretty much just people can upload their textbooks there. We have links to all the ones that we publish there. And so it's really strictly textbooks. OER Commons right there, just to the right, is they've got textbooks, but they've got all the other stuff. So they've got, like, I don't know, slideshows, ancillaries. There's a lot of stuff in there. So if you go there, it can be a little overwhelming. And there's a lot of even K through 12 stuff in there. So you have to use the filters to kind of, like, if you want to search through your subject, kind of find some things that would be appropriate for your classes. There's filters on the left where you can, focus it by audience level. And then these are just a few other places that you can look and see. Skills Commons is pretty cool because it's open resources related to, like, workforce development stuff, and it's kind of interesting. So that's just to give you an idea that again, there are trusted publishers of OER where it's gone through some review processes. Let's put it that way. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for my slides. I wanted to mention that I didn't dive deeply into open pedagogy today, but if you're interested in that, I am going to do another session in a couple of weeks on that. And then September 14th, finding and evaluating OER, and then a look at DEIA. So just because you're using an OER, it doesn't mean that it's more better for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Doesn't necessarily mean that, but it has the potential to do that. So in the traditional textbook space, there's a lot of gatekeeping, as with academia, and so that is a factor that is being shown in the research, that OER has less gatekeeping in terms of who gets to have their voices heard in the process of publishing. And then the last one this semester is going to be for people who are interested in creating their own OER and how the library can support the sharing of that. Okay, so that was a very high level, quick, fast overview of OER. Do you have questions, Camille, since you're the only person here in the room?
You have Melissa here too.
Oh, Melissa. Oh, sorry, I can't see all the faces. Let me
Yes.
stop sharing so I can see.
I did have a question, if that's
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
So do you find OER is usually covers gen eds and not necessarily graduate content? What do you think?
In the beginning, yes. And depending on your field, it's coming. Remind me, are you in nursing?
Occupational therapy.
Occupational therapy. Okay. Because the reason I said that is because there's actually a forthcoming, really nice grant-funded platform for nursing OER that are aligned with accreditation things. It's kind of an interesting project. So people are working on that. So I think with OER, it obviously started in the gen ed space because there's more bang for your buck, right? You've got all these students taking these classes. It's generalizable across different institutions. So yeah, absolutely. There's more of that content, but as time goes on, more and more of the advanced stuff is showing up. So it just depends. And I tell people, yeah, you might have looked at OER a few years ago and found nothing. If you look now, you might find something. Yeah, it's changing quickly.
All right, thank you. I haven't ran into anything in content in my area, but I haven't really looked thoroughly. But it's interesting if it's coming to nursing. I don't know. Melissa's also in healthcare too, so in our college. So I wonder if she's finding it. I don't know.
And when I run across, so I'm on all these, open listservs, and they announce new OER all the time. And when I see things that come up like that, I will like forward that to the library liaison for your area and say, hey, let your faculty know this new thing is coming out. So maybe I can help you a little bit with that too.
Thank you. We got to meet Rachel recently too, so that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, Melissa, do you have any questions?
But just kind of following up with some of that, like looking for, because I'm in medical laboratory science, and just finding things that are, specific to your profession.
Yeah.
I think it would be, and maybe we work with our new library liaison on that, because you said there's probably a lot of information in OERs for general education classes. But when you get to our specific disciplines, like how do we even go about finding these things? And
so I have a request for you, if you wouldn't mind. So after this session, if you would email me maybe just a list of the textbooks you're using now.
Okay.
And I will poke around the literature and see if I can find anything similar in OER. And I will reply to you and copy Rachel so she can see that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I'll take a look and I'll show you where I looked to give you some ideas. And yeah.
Okay, and that would be really good for, each profession, as
yes, I know.
And maybe that's something your new library liaison can work on. Like what in nursing, what's available, what in OT, what's available, and or in MLS, and like in public health, what would be available.
Yeah, and I started, yes, exactly. Yes, I absolutely want to provide a resource like that. And I started kind of on I have an OER, I should have shared the link to this. I have a LibGuide. I'm gonna let's see, I'm gonna open another window so I can grab that and put the link. I have a library guide I've created about OER that's got a bunch of stuff in there, and it's got a tab. Sorry, I've got too many windows open. It's got a tab on there that talks about different there's a chat window, different books that are already being used by faculty at EKU, and then some sort of subject specific things. So I've been wanting to flesh that out. I just haven't had time. And actually this week we have interviewed, we've created a new librarian position, specifically open strategies librarian. So that person will be able to work with me and like really focus on just really expanding these kinds of local resources that we can make available for you. So it's coming. But yes, and we will definitely use the liaison program to kind of curate that stuff for you guys and share when we hear of new OER in your field, we'll pass that along to you. Because we know you don't always have the time to go do the hunting. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Sorry.
Sure. Absolutely. Okay.
Kelly, I had a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry, I had to drop out for some tech issues, so I didn't get to hear if you might have already answered this, but how do you see the future of OER advancing?
Oh, well, I think it's going to continue to gain steam. Depending on what happens with this equitable access model, more and more universities are signing on to the kind of thing that we have at EKU, which is not a bad, it's not a bad thing. It helps students, but it also locks us into the model of paying publishers and disincentivizes faculty from wanting to explore this option. The issue that I see currently is and you guys may not realize this, but we don't actually pay Booksmart through Booksmart for the specific books that are assigned. It's a per credit hour fee that we pay. So whether a faculty member uses OER in their class or not makes no difference in terms of how much we're paying Barnes & Noble. So this is a model, I don't know, it's a struggle to work within this right now, I guess. But a lot of institutions don't have the ability to do this, and they don't, what they're doing, most other universities are building in a fee to students. So I think right now it's like about $25 per credit hour. So if a student was taking 12 credit hours, they'd pay 25 times that, and that would be their textbook cost, whether or not their faculty use OER or not. So we might get to a point where faculty are using OER and students are still paying for the textbooks, and that's not going to be a good thing. But I do think that the faculty I have worked with who came to OER because they wanted to save money for students, once they started working with it, what really resonated with them and what they really appreciated was the pedagogical opportunities and freedom. So I try to remind folks that that's definitely a benefit of working with OER. That's your question.
Just a comment to follow up with that. What we found when you get to these discipline specific textbooks that, you know, mostly now we're using the ebooks just for the convenience. But at the end of the semester, the student loses access to this.
That's right.
Then these are books that they will need in their profession.
Yep.
So, you know, if we can find them an OER resource that they can take with them, that would benefit, because at the end of the semester, they lose access to these ebooks. And really, you know, at the end, we're giving cumulative board exams. I mean, we give a comprehensive final. This is over every topic we've covered. They no longer have access to those textbooks.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that class may have been a year ago. So, but we tell them all the time, keep your notes, because the review's coming. And, you know, that if we can find something that they can take with them. You know, because I've thought that too with the Booksmart, what's the advantage here? But we do need to give them something. And then if there's an update, they can find that and where to find that. Yeah.
That's a great point. That is one of the other big selling points of OER is you don't lose it. You don't lose access to it. Well, and even before Booksmart, I'm sure a lot of your students were renting their textbooks and losing them.
Yes. And then at the end, because our seniors, the very last thing we do is give a comprehensive final over everything. So getting ready, you know, they have to get ready to take this board exam. And then they don't have access to all those books anymore.
Does the board exam change frequently? The content?
No, that's a long process. There's probably things on that board exam from 10 years ago because it's such a long,
that's interesting. That's what I see that as an opportunity. Like, it'd be great if some faculty at a bunch of different institutions would like collaborate and do even like, you could do an OER study guide for that, like a review guide.
Yeah. I mean, there are published like review guides. And we usually recommend those to our students, you know, but to have a continuous access to the textbooks.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind. Yes, I'll be on the lookout for OT materials. And anybody who watches this video, for what it's worth, after this presentation, if you have any questions about your own field and you want to find some resources, just get in touch with me and I'd be glad to help.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kelly.